Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshat Luthra. At least 1,100 are dead, thousands wounded as the brutal conflict between Israel and Hamas enters day 3. Hamas launched a surprise attack on Israel through the porous Gaza border. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said at least 700 Israelis are dead and dozens taken hostage. Over 400 people have been killed in Gaza, which is being pounded by Israeli jets. The US is sending a warship near Israel in a show of solidarity. Radhika Udas gets you this report. Hundreds had gathered at the desert in southern Israel for the Supernova Music Festival when Hamas fighters launched a surprise attack. Partygoers attempted to escape a hail of bullets. At least 260 people were killed at this one spot and dozens taken hostage. Hamas fighters were pouring into Israel through several points. Within a few hours, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared war.
אנחנו במלחמה צריך לשמור על קור רוח. אני קורא לכל אזרחי ישראל להתאחד כדי להשיג את היעד העליון שלנו, ניצחון במלחמה.
The worst day in Israel's history, Israel's 9/11. This is how Israel's government and the army has been describing the attack by Hamas. In retaliation, Israel is pounding the Gaza Strip with airstrikes. There are reports of civilian casualties on both sides. A school run by the United Nations in Gaza was also hit by Israeli airstrikes. Israel is likely to have hit 500 targets inside Gaza so far. Israel has amassed over 1 lakh troops at the Gaza border. The United Nations Security Council met to discuss the conflict but could not agree on a statement. The United States is sending an aircraft carrier near Israel and has pledged more military aid.
I want to say to them and to the world and to terrorists everywhere that the United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back. We'll make sure that they have the help their citizens need and they can continue to defend themselves.
The US views the ongoing violence as a threat that could start a major new war in the Middle East. A few pro-Palestine protesters came out at Times Square in New York and White House expressing their opposition to US support for Israel. The Chinese Foreign Ministry released a statement calling for a ceasefire and pushing for the implementation of the two-state solution, which means establishing an independent state of Palestine. Saudi Arabia, which was in the process of normalizing relations with Israel, called for a credible peace process that leads to the two-state solution. The UAE, which is the first Gulf country to normalize relations with Israel, has termed the attack as a serious and grave escalation. India's External Affairs Minister is yet to issue an official statement. But Prime Minister Modi tweeted on Saturday expressing shock at what he called a terrorist attack and said India stands in solidarity with Israel. The tension between Israel and Hamas has been simmering for decades. Israel now claims it is in control of all the areas, including the fencing around Gaza. But Hamas fighters are still likely to be present inside Israeli territory. With inputs from news agencies and Radhika Udas in Mumbai, Parikshat Luthra for CNBC-TV18. I'm now joined by former Ambassador to Israel, Navteej Sarna, and Shalom Lipna, non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Mr. Lipna, I'd like to ask you, give us a sense of how things are on the ground. This is the third day of the war. Things seem to be very bad. You told us a short while back that you were in a line to donate blood. How are things on the ground currently?
Good to be with you. Yes, in fact, obviously the situation on the ground remains very tense. On this third day of the fighting, I'm actually still at this blood drive, which has been populated by hundreds, if not thousands, of people standing in line to do this. Israelis are still reeling from the Saturday morning attack, which woke them by air raid sirens, certainly in other parts of the country which have not generally been exposed to this. And right now they're sort of, feeling their way around to figure out what the next steps look like. I mean, there's been an initial incursion, I understand, or maybe not an incursion, but, sort of lower-level activities involving the area around Gaza and Gaza. And, the understanding is that they're amassing for a wider operation once the military is, is prepared for that.
All right. You feel that there is this is going to be a long-lasting conflict. But Ambassador Sarna, 7th October, Saturday, why do you think this date was chosen by the Hamas? This was a major Jewish holiday. And do you get a sense that this was months in planning?
Certainly, Parikshit, from the way that it has panned out, this is obviously not a typical, random firing of Hamas rockets from Gaza that has taken place from time to time. And I wouldn't agree with the description of the border there as porous, as was mentioned earlier. It is a very heavily guarded and normally fortified fence, which which has been put up at considerable cost. So to break through, not at one place, but at 20 odd places, and send in hundreds of people, besides firing thousands of rockets, is not something which can be just done at the drop of a hat. It requires deep preparation, and that has obviously happened. Therefore, this has been in the planning for a while. As to why that particular day was chosen, of course, there would be all sorts of thoughts coming. Of course, the biggest parallel that's being drawn is that it's almost 50 years to the Yom Kippur War, in which, at a time where also Egyptian and Syrian armies had surprised the Israeli Defense Forces on the holiday of Yom Kippur. But that's one way of looking at it. That's all.
Right. Mr. Lipner, coming back to you, what kind of challenges does this attack now pose for Israel, where it is currently and where it is in its domestic politics as well? What do you think really helped the Hamas breach the border at multiple points? There were Hamas terrorists who were able to cross the border on motorcycles, on SUVs as well. Do you think they got help from other nations, maybe Iran as well?
It's possible that, I understand that's still being investigated and there hasn't been a final determination on that. The military, I believe, issued a statement saying that that was not the case, but most of us have seen the Wall Street Journal account that suggested it was. I think, as the ambassador said, this was obviously months in planning. And the fact that it happened on this holiday weekend when, forces were maybe drawn down a little bit would have, led to the fact that that might have been an opportune moment. I think we could also add, as your question suggested, that, there has been no small amount of domestic unrest over here, which mostly surrounds the issue of this judicial reform, which has brought hundreds of thousands of people out into the street. So conventional wisdom, at least, has been that, that some of Israel's enemies might have looked at that and suggested, that the country was not particularly resilient in this moment and would not be able to sort of push back and against an attack like this. How that will play out in the coming days remains to be seen. This country is famous for rebounding, and people are coming around and rallying to the flag. So I don't think there's any real doubt that Israel will be able to mount sort of a response, in Gaza right now. And as the government has said, what was in the past will no longer be moving into the future. I think we have to see what that will look like operationally. But clearly we're on the verge of a response to this to this sort of crushing blow that Israel suffered this week.
All right. So you're saying that we are witnessing a response to that crushing blow to Israel. Ambassador Sarna, you have written about this, how this is a setback for brand Israel, a setback for the peace accords as well. Do you think somewhere accountability will be sought on how the intelligence setup, the Iron Dome of Israel was breached?
Well, I think there will be a certain amount of, soul searching as to how did Israel, which is reputed for its abilities to detect and to mount preemptive strikes, as well as tremendous intelligence gathering from within the militant groups that continue to threaten its security from different sides. I think that has certainly been put into doubt. The vulnerabilities of Israel have unfortunately been shown up, and that I'm sure, given the fact that the Israel system being what it is, there will be a lot of questions asked. There are already a lot of questions in Israeli media that are being put forward. And I'm sure that they would like to get to the bottom of what happened, because, yes, it's not just the brand that has been hurt. 700 and more people Israeli citizens have also been killed, and what has now started is resulting in further civilian casualties in Gaza. So questions will be asked whether the government was so obsessed with its own differences, whether its policies had actually stultified normal Israeli responses, whether its policies had divided the society, including the security services, deep down the middle for several months. Is that what led to its security readiness not being what it usually is?
Right. Mr. Lipner, coming back to you, how do you think Israel is going to respond to this over the next few weeks? How long could this conflict be? Already in the last 3 days, we are hearing about at least 1,100 to 1,200 deaths, many of them children. How do you think this conflict will pan out? And will there be a show of unity in the government and in Israeli politics?
Well, obviously, as you indicate, the losses have been devastating. I think that, Israel is licking its wounds right now, trying to regroup on that. The government has pledged to, again, as I said earlier, and as they've said, to make sure that the situation does not return to what had been considered normal before that. By all accounts, the expectation is that this campaign will be prosecuted now in such a way as to make sure that the Hamas leadership is taken out of control and is not able to do this anytime again in the future. But that'll require a delicate balance between managing the emotional impulses here and strategic imperatives, what it is that the country really needs to do to restore its security and deterrence. To your second piece on the government, well, right now we see that that in fact members of the opposition are in a negotiation with the government to consider the idea of joining some sort of emergency cabinet. Those talks are ongoing. There's massive, I would even say, public pressure for that to happen. People are looking for a broad-based leadership now to make tough decisions that people can get behind, especially at a period of such great internal division. The only way that this could really move forward would be if people join forces. So I think we'll keep watching that space to see how those talks proceed.
Okay, final two questions. Ambassador Sarna, how do you think this impacts talks on the IMEC corridor? Israel was trying to normalize its relations with Saudi Arabia, other Middle Eastern countries. India was very enthusiastic about the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. First of all, how does this impact IMEC?
Well, I think, projects like that require an atmosphere of peace, require an atmosphere of cooperation and trust. And, the reality is that peace is not going to be in the offing for a while, certainly in West Asia. And therefore, projects like IMEC and others will necessarily have to be put on the back burner. That would be my guess. I don't think, the countries are going to have the mental space or even the strategic space to be able to normalize relations. For instance, the Saudi-Israeli normalization process would go into freeze at least for a while, because unless we see a return to normalcy, which at the moment, everything is going in the reverse direction. So I wouldn't be holding my breath for any common infrastructural projects to be worked on at present.
Right. And Shalom Lipner, do you also feel that the ongoing conversations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the U.S. role in all of this, somewhere this had to do with Hamas's motivations to attack Israel?
I'm sure that was obviously part of it, aside from all the, tactical reasons which we discussed earlier. I agree with the ambassador. I think that certainly in the immediate term, we'll be witnessing a reordering of regional priorities. But I'd certainly like to sort of try and end our conversation on an optimistic note. I think the reason that these agreements were concluded in the first place is because, there's a clear trajectory towards that kind of progress. Those projects are mutually beneficial to all the partners. When people, when member states signed on to those kinds of deals, they understood that sort of negative repercussions that we're seeing now, were always possible as something within the mix. But I think we can all hope that they will show the sustainability to get through this period one way or another, and to be able to pursue those agendas that are good for all the partners involved.
All right. Thank you very much, Shalom Lipna and Ambassador Sarna, for joining us, giving us that perspective. We're going to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We will be joined by Kobi Shoshani, Consul General of Israel to Mumbai, in just a bit. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. I'm now joined by Kobi Shoshani, Consul General of Israel to Mumbai. Thank you very much for joining us on the show, Consul General. I'd like to begin by asking you, where do the casualty figures, the number of those kidnapped by Hamas, stand as of now?
Thank you, Pakshit. It's right now it's almost reached. I mean, the official numbers talking about around 800 casualties, dead casualties, but the number is going to rise up. It's that's our sensitive way to count the casualties. It's very, very sensitive. Don't forget that in the last 48 hours we were under operation, under attacks, without controlling all the southern part of Israel. Right now, I'm very happy to say that we are controlling the south part of Israel completely. Now everything will be a little bit more fast forward, and to understand what's going on and the real numbers and the information of the families will be highly in higher importance to give them, first of all, the first knowledge about their beloved people.
Right. Consul General, this is a question that is being asked repeatedly. Why 7th of October was chosen? This must have been months in planning by the Hamas. Why do you think this timing was chosen? Do you think the Hamas had outside help?
And there are two questions here. I will try to answer one by one according to the sources that I have. First of all, that was the last day of our Israeli festival, our holiday. It was it's very important. It's a very, I mean, people going to the nature, people going to a celebration. people going to pray. It's a very Jewish. That's the last day of the operation. It was a big. I assume that it was, of course, a big party with around 3,000 people in the southern part of Israel dancing, and I assume that Hamas knows about this party. It was not far away from the border. And of course, the symbolic 1973 war. I was a child at the war. I remember this war in a very clear voice. And it was, and of course, such an event with big operation, military, and such a massive capabilities with around 1,000 people who are participated from this brutal terrorists of Hamas. It's something that was a big surprise for us. We are still investigating. I've heard the last conversation of the interview. It's really a big question right now, a very open question. But right now, and we know that there is a connection to other terrorist group, if it's Hezbollah, if it's the Iranian that actually support them. We know other terrorist activities in Gaza Strip that they gave them help, and external foreign entities, terrorist entities that they support them. It was a surprise, but I have to admit about it.
Right. Consul General, we'd also like to ask you about the peace talks that Israel was having with other nations, the dialogue it was in with Saudi Arabia. Do you think all those peace talks now take a step back, then will now be on the back burner? Is it right to assume that it's been a major setback to those diplomatic conversations?
It's a good question. I don't think that I have the answer right now, because right now Israel is concentrated in one or two important main key issues. First of all, to bring the peace to Israel, and second thing, to teach this brutal terrorist a lesson. Because what's happened and what you saw in the channels, in the media, the brutality of this, I cannot even describe them as a terrorist, because it's a privilege to call them a terrorist. They are animals. What they did in the brutal ways towards kids, women, elderly people, they touch our deepest open history nerves. I cannot describe it in other words. And right now, the second phase is to teach them a lesson, and they will pay the price for that. This is the only concentration right now. We don't think right now about Saudi Arabia. Of course, it's very important. I don't think it's going to damage this relation. In the contrary, the involvement of the Iranians and all these Shia groups in the north part of Israel, if it will be involved, it just speed the process. Because they understand, even I think in the Muslim world, they understand what they saw in the photos is something that even Muslim people cannot accept. And this is something that I think that even some of them are happy right now. When they will see the photos, they will not accept it.
Okay, those are important points that you're talking about. Now, this is being called the worst war, the worst conflict between Israel and Palestine. We all know that the Israel-Palestine conflict has been going on for decades. How is Israel's response going to be diplomatically, militarily? And do you think this time you're dealing with a stronger Hamas?
It's a good question, but the answer is very simple. I think our Prime Minister make it in a very clear voice. We are at war. And when you are at war, you are acting like in a war. What's happened here, and you know, Israel is a very small country. It's talking about 9 million people, which means that 900, maybe 1,000 casualties. Everybody knows someone that actually killed. It's touching the open nerves of the Jewish people in such a way that brings us back to 1940 during the Second World War and the Holocaust. The scenery that we've seen. Now, the retaliation going to be very hard. I'm telling you in a very clear voice. We spoke last night with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, all the ambassadors, and he told us in a very clear way, we are on the way to a war. And it's not only a word, it's not only a legal status, it's a definition of war by all means, and they will touch our open wounds and open nerves,
All right.
and they will pay for it.
All right. My final question. Have you sought foreign help in this war? Have you sought India's help?
Not at all. Right now, I know everybody saw what the clear voice of your Prime Minister Modi ji. It was a clear voice. What we need right now is the moral words from the good side of the world. You know, this incident show that the world is divided between good and bads, between brutal terrorists and democracies and moral countries. India, of course, is in the good side. Prime Minister Biden make it in a very clear voice. And I think that most and all of the European countries, all the moral states are in the good side. We don't need any specific help. Of course, the Americans give us a variety of help, including financial, helping the military. But right now, we don't need any help. But your support, your kind words, the messages that I got in the last 48 hours make us in Israel, and I reported about each and one of them, and I would like to get this opportunity to thank these people, warm and very highly respected by Israeli. This is the finest time in our nations between India and Israel to see this support.
All right. Consul General, we're completely out of time, but thank you once again for joining us, telling us how the situation is on ground and how Israel is likely to react in the days to come. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. More news and updates continue right here.